Most people are familiar with newswires like the Associated Press and Reuters, but a much newer upstart called Stacker has devised a new business model for syndicating content. Rather than charging a fee for its articles, it instead gives away its data journalism to any publisher that wants it. It then charges brands a fee to create and distribute sponsored content across the thousands of media outlets that subscribe to its service. In a recent interview, co-founder Noah Greenberg explained how Stacker works with publishers, its process for creating sponsored content, and why he has no interest in driving an audience to Stacker's owned and operated website. Hello, I'm Simon Owens, and this is The Business of Content, the show about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. If you want to listen to an audio version of this show, subscribe to The Business of Content wherever you get your podcasts. And finally, if you're on the lookout for interviews with the world's most successful media entrepreneurs about how they built their businesses, then this is the show for you. So take a few moments to hit the subscribe button down below. Okay, let's jump into the interview. Hey Noah, thanks for joining us.
Good to see you, Simon.
So we've had you on the podcast before, and we're not going to completely rehash all the stuff that went into making your company. We want to focus specifically to talk about your kind of sponsored content operations. But just to give people a little bit of an overview of what Stacker is, when was it initially founded?
We founded Stacker in 2017.
And it's you and another co-founder, or how many co-founders?
Myself and 3 co-founders. We'd all worked together at another startup prior to Stacker, and bootstrapped the company in 2017.
And what's kind of the elevator pitch for what Stacker does?
Stacker has built the first earned syndication platform for brand content. So essentially, we've realized that a lot of brands are hiring journalists and producing some really incredible research and service journalism. And at the same time, news outlets all across the country have a really big appetite for quality third-party content they can run on their sites. Those news outlets don't want to sift through thousands of PR pitches. And so we essentially run a platform where brands can submit great journalism. We vet and curate the best pieces, compile that into a newswire, and then license and syndicate that newswire for free to over 3,000 news outlets across the country.
And maybe your business has changed somewhat. Are you also producing non-sponsored content, or is it 100% sponsored content at this point?
So content that goes into the wire comes from kind of 3 sources, one of which, again, is we're sourcing from third parties that are producing great content. That content is not sponsored content, is content produced by, whether it be Experian or the Marshall Project. About 20% of the organizations that submit into the newswire are actually nonprofit newsrooms. And then we work with a lot of newsrooms or a lot of organizations that have gone out and hired journalists. It is being made freely available to those end publishers. So when we work with news outlets at McClatchy or Hearst or Lee Enterprises, they're getting a free source of content. Kind of as a new way of helping them access all of this content out there. So we're sourcing from over 100 different organizations. We also have an in-house team of 15 data journalists that is producing about 50 to 60 stories every month, many of which are underwritten by brands, and then a lot of which are also just produced to make the newswire as robust as possible.
And for the partners that are just feeding you content that you're then putting into the wire, what's their incentive for working through you? Is it just because you have the distribution network to get them to in front of a larger audience or something like that?
Yeah, it's that we break down a lot of barriers. So, when I think of the distribution network, really what we've built up over the past 7 years is first, just the relationships with publishers. So we've gone out and signed licensing and syndication partnerships with over 150 different publishing groups. On top of that, we've integrated RSS feeds directly into those publisher CMSs. So if I'm an editor at the Miami Herald, I log in, and right next to my AP and my Reuters wire content, there's a bunch of content provided through the Stacker wire. So we're just removing a lot of friction for those editors to actually access content from these third parties. And then finally, it is that we're really acting as the standard bearer for quality. So if I am a PR person at Rocket Loans reaching out cold to a news outlet, there's just a lot of back and forth, obviously, over the methodology that went into that piece, et cetera. And the news outlets that we syndicate to really do see us as the filter for quality. Every piece that comes through the wire goes through our editorial board to make sure that it meets a set of agreed upon editorial standards. And so we're really just removing a lot of that friction between those two parties.
And then you said you have 15 data journalists. So they create just 50 to 60 pieces of content per month. Some of that content is underwritten by a brand, and we'll talk about what that means. But then some of the content is just them doing data-based journalism, pulling in from data sources and creating stories around them.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we need to make sure that our newswire being made available to publishers is a fully comprehensive newswire. So, we can't 1 month have a bunch of organizations submitting real estate content and have a really robust real estate section. And then 6 months later, there's no real estate content going in. So whether we're covering politics, whether we're covering the Olympics, current events, our newsroom is constantly thinking about what are really interesting data angles that we can tell, just to make sure that our newswire is a must-have for any newsroom out there.
And so for a non-sponsored piece of content that you created, what's a good example of something you're really proud of?
If you head over to Stacker.com, I don't really think about a differentiation between is it sponsored or is it not, ultimately because our newsroom is just thinking about what really interesting stories can we tell in whatever niche or whatever topic is something we want to tell a story in.
Well, what's a piece of data journalism then that you would think of, like when you're talking to people at a party or something like that, to give them an example? What's something?
We've done really awesome work just looking at everything from kind of underserved areas in terms of healthcare coverage, pulling from CDC data. We've done really amazing work looking at kind of real estate statistics and where people are moving to. So we're rarely thinking about how do we break the news, but more thinking about rather how do we kind of add context to the conversation, really more around like kitchen table topics.
So contextually, you're kind of like a 538, but instead of building your brand on an owned and operated website, you are a distributed network newswire, basically, right? Would that be kind of like a good way to explain it? I think
the kind of founding thesis when we started was 7 years ago, was seeing how organizations like 538, The Upshot, Vox's Explainers were doing really interesting data journalism that helped put the world into context. A lot of that journalism, though, was being presented in a very kind of long read, very data heavy format. And we really thought, how can we present this in a bit more of a easy to digest format, but still presenting a lot of that similar data journalism.
And the value proposition of you versus like a newswire like Reuters or AP is that you're completely free to, like, any publisher can use your content and they don't have to pay you at all, right?
Yeah, so our relationship with news outlets that want to license and syndicate our wire is completely non-economic. So you're right. They're not paying for the wire. They get hundreds of pieces, free access to publish, similar to like what they would take from an AP or a Reuters. A lot of the content is a bit, less current events based and a bit more evergreen lifestyle pieces, data journalism and service journalism pieces. But to your point earlier around what differentiates this from sponsored content is those end publishers are also not being compensated or incentivized to take the wire beyond their own business models. So they're getting free content that they can monetize through, obviously, ads. A lot of our local news outlets that are leaning heavier into subscriptions are using these as a way to kind of break down the pay meter of how many stories a reader reads before they are asked, to subscribe. But it's a free source of content for them.
Yeah. So to kind of translate what you're saying is because they're not getting paid by the sponsor that's paying you, they don't have to run it as sponsored content since they've presumably done their own editorial vetting to say this is high quality enough to run on our news site. So it might get more, your sponsored content might get more organic distribution than the average website sponsored content because it's not like in some like siloed sponsored content section. It's just running alongside news stories because there's that kind of that firewall where they're not actually getting paid for the content. Their form of payment is they're getting all this content for free.
Yeah, I think what we've seen is when you sponsor a post on a publisher, they're finding ways to send some traffic to it, but a lot of the time, because they have some sort of guarantee of it will get this many readers on our site, they're going out and buying traffic to it through Taboola or Outbrain, or just finding like, how do we meet that minimum threshold we promised. Conversely, when a publisher takes a story through the Stacker Newswire that a brand has produced, they're publishing that story because they want to share it with their readers. And the only way that, beyond sharing valuable content with their audience, that they're making money off that is by promoting it. And so we're seeing that when a lot of publishers take these stories, they're promoting them in their newsletter. They're using them on social to bring traffic into their site. They're, publishing them, whether it be on their homepage or in related sections, to drive more views and clicks out of their existing readership to circulate to new articles. So it is being run on their site as an article as opposed to a sponsored post.
So it's kind of like a symbiotic relationship in the sense that you get distribution of your sponsored content, which produces value for your advertising clients. They get free content that they can use in their audience building that they can run, programmatic ads against or whatever.
Yeah, we really see our kind of responsibility and our opportunity as optimizing the impact of all of this content that is being created. So there's obviously a huge trend of brands going out and hiring really talented journalists and producing content, whether it be from their own proprietary data or just hiring experts to put out kind of more service journalism, research-based content in their space. And we really see our opportunity as, how can we make it so that that content gets a lot more readers, because most people are not going to the blogs of these organizations where they're posting the content. So helping it find more reach and readership, but also extending the impact of that content for these end local news outlets that are looking for more content they can augment their own coverage for. So this content's being created, and we're really thinking about how do we make sure that, the fact that this content is being created, we can help impact as many people as possible.
And even though all this content you're creating is published to your website, you are not really focused on building an audience or driving traffic to your website, because the main value is the distributed network.
Yeah, when we founded Stacker, something that was really important to the founders is we want to focus on what we can be best in the world at, and building a consumer-facing destination website did not seem like that thing. And so Stacker.com, and where you can find our articles, is really more of a way for reporters and editors to see this is the type of content that Stacker puts out. We do see a couple million visits, readers coming to that site, but that is not really where we're focused on strategically in terms of our O&O.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So let's talk about, you said you have 15 data journalists. How big is your staff, your entire staff?
We're about 50 people full-time.
50 people. And so how do you acquire clients? Do you have like your own sales team?
Yeah, we do. We have a sales team that's going out, working with organizations that are either already housing in-house teams and looking for distribution, or taking some inbound from organizations that want to play in the content and data journalism space but don't have that team. And then that sales team operates independently from a separate partnerships group that is focused on publisher development and creating relationships with news outlets to help them syndicate our newswire.
Yeah. And the sponsors, like, the value to them is this is like thought leadership content. Like their data is getting cited, or their expertise is being cited and used in these articles, so that when they appear across all these articles across these news sites, they're like basically helping to build their brand as an authority on whatever that topic is.
Exactly. I think we've seen that there's a huge trend of brands realizing that they need to build a lot more brand authority and credibility in their space. And that a great way to do that is to put out really interesting research in their space. And, depending on the organization and their business model and, what type of customer they're going after, sometimes that's just, we need to build really strong brand recognition. So we work with Lyft. Lyft recognizes that everyone has 2 apps in their phone to call a ride with. And if you've recently read an article that morning in your hometown paper about commuting trends from Lyft data, you're a little bit more likely to pull out the Lyft app. We also work with organizations that help operate broker or marketplaces rather for life insurance. That's just a really big, highly considered decision. And they know that if you've never heard of their organization or you don't trust them, you're probably not going to look to them to pick a life insurance policy. And so organizations like that, it's less about being top of mind and more about really building trust and authority in your space.
Hi there, Simon here. So that's the end of the free preview for this episode. If you want to listen to or watch the full episode, you have to become a paid subscriber to my Substack. When you subscribe, you're able to book a half-hour introductory phone call with me. You also receive subscriber-only interviews with some of the world's most successful media entrepreneurs. Support the work I do here by subscribing at simonowens.substack.com. That's simonowens.substack.com. Or just Google the words Simon Owens and newsletter.